Alrighty everyone, hello, and now today I really want to talk to you guys a little bit about a brand new book that I've pretty much recently finished. The only part I have left is really just like a collection of quotes of different mystics, and for the most part, as you can see, I've been making my way through it. I've been getting through this whole thing. And I got this book by one of my lovely followers over on TikTok, sending it to me through my Amazon wishlist. If you guys ever were feeling generous or just wanted to do something, I always do have my Amazon wishlist public, and sometimes people grab things off of there that mysteriously appear at my door. And this was one of those things, and you know what? I could not be more grateful for that, because this was a truly phenomenal read. So a while back I actually got this book for myself, which is the Essential Writings of Christian Mysticism, and this is often referenced in this book, but the thing about this one, as you can see, I'm kind of like a fifth of the way through it. The thing about this one is that this is an anthology of the just direct, raw, unexplained, notes basically of these mystics. Like, there's some introduction to them to kind of give us a sense of who it is that's speaking and what the context of their life is, but once you start reading the actual words of, say, John Tauler, in his Sermon 39, or Catherine of Genoa, or anything else, it's dense. It's a little difficult. It's a little heavy. And while I really do want to finish this, and I really have enjoyed what I've read so far, even if it's kind of hard to really explain some of what I've read so far, it's really just not something you can kind of just get through at once. You know what I mean? You gotta read a bit and then digest a bit, read a bit, digest a bit. On the other hand, this book, Growing into God, A Beginner's Guide to Christian Mysticism, this does really do the work of breaking down Christian mysticism, what it is, what it entails, what people who engage in it end up seeing and experiencing, what anyone who is spiritual in any way might end up experiencing, so on and so forth. And I have a lot of thoughts about this, so let us dive on in. Well, hi, Bib. Hi, Bib. What? Come on, Bib. Why are you yelling? Why are we yelling? What are we yelling about? Bilok thinks this is his territory, so the fact that I'm sitting in my reading chair that I bought with my money makes him so upset. What? Anyway, to get into this, basically, let me start by saying that what mysticism is something that basically deals with a person's direct experience with the divine. This is where a lot of times the whole concept of faith, of just believing, almost goes out the door, because there's a kind of experience that seems to transcend just the bare bones, I believe something is, and it becomes, I know something is, to the point that I don't need to even bother pressing it. I don't need to bother. It's an experience with divinity that leads to many interesting ideas, as we see both in this anthology and in this here introductory book. And one of those experiences is one that I feel like explains a lot of what ex-witches turned Christians go through. And I'll explain more about that in a minute. But in essence, we find that a lot of the mystics, when they are able to get outside of just the dogma, when they're able to get outside of, the more basic go to church and then come home kind of Christian lifestyle, when they really meditate with God, when they really commit themselves to fully experiencing God, they discover things that most churches would probably deem heretical. And yet, these experiences are how the Bible even came to be in the first place. I mean, what do you think it means when Paul says he knows someone who was taken up to the third heaven? That's actually a part of Merkaba or Hechelon mysticism, which is literally, Merkaba especially means chariot, and it's this idea that one can literally ascend up, the different planes of heaven. So here Marby says that Merkaba mysticism, believed that by hard work at specific mystical disciplines, a mystic could gain access to the chariot, which would carry them into the heavens, reveal them the secrets of the universe, and even usher them through the gates of paradise. Most famous of the Merkaba mystics was Rabbi Akiva, and there's a tale about him and 3 other rabbis who attempted to storm the gates of heaven. All 4 of them were successful. Only Rabbi Akiva was able to tell the tale because the others kind of went nuts. One of them realized how absolutely pithy all of human comforts are, and stopped eating, stopped drinking, and just withered away because, like, nothing interested him anymore after he had seen heaven, you know? So, very, very wild stuff. Very wild stuff with Merkaba mysticism, and that's what Paul was likely about when he started saying stuff like, I was taken up to the 3rd heaven. And likewise, what I mean with things kind of heretical, things that Christians would say, oh, no, 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 that's not true, is an example of Julian of Norwich. Julian of Norwich was a very, very well-known English mystic, and in fact, she is the first woman to really write a work of any notable length in the English language. Just like Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, and that was part of how English as a language even survived in a time where French was pushed more, so too did Julian of Norwich's writings really solidify the importance of English because that's what she wrote in. And Julian was a very interesting figure. She was one that was so committed to her practice that she kind of became a cloistered person, as in she literally committed herself to living in one single room for the rest of her life willingly in order to spend as much time as possible praying, meditating, and writing her insights and what she saw when she was communing with God. Despite all the tiptoeing she had to do around the church and the heretical stuff that she was in danger of saying, despite all the dogma she had to dance around, she said that, well, yes, I don't doubt that hell and purgatory exists. When I experienced God, I did not see that hellfire. I did not see that terrible judgment or any of these things. I saw a force of divine love that is open to all people, and that it's us who turns away from it. And that's significant because when we go through the anthology, we realize in a completely separate time and place, Catherine of Genoa in Italy said the exact same thing. So too even did the Quakers. The founder of Quakerism, or the Society of Friends, had much this similar idea. And so remember last week when we were talking about New Agery and all that kind of stuff, how there's actually a lot of New Age ideals that many people share without realizing? So pantheism appears among Quakers. It also appears among us, for instance, Saint Simeon, who... Saint Simeon, the new theologian, goes, I move my hand, and my hand is holy Christ, for God's divinity is united inseparable to me. I move my foot, and lo, it glows like God himself. The ideas of pantheism, that God is in everything, that God is part of us, is not a new idea. It is a very mystic idea, and it transcends all of this stuff about New Age, this and that, and up and down. These are saints. These are holy men. These are holy women who have done the work to understand divinity more than just reading the Bible front to back, more than just praying a bunch. They have done some crazy stuff in the pursuit of enlightenment, you know? So it was George Fox, who in England created the Society of Friends, and his doctrine was that the light of Christ indwells every human being, and that this light is the only reliable spiritual authority. So basically, more than the Bible, more than church pastors and priests and stuff, he was saying everyone has a bit of Christ's light in them, and that is what truly pushes them to do the right thing. And so they were, the whole thing about Quakers being like super duper pacifist, it comes from the idea that, well, if everyone is a piece of God, then when you hurt your fellow man, you're hurting God, right? So that's where that pacifism comes from, which is so fascinating. But there are so many different types of mysticism, there are so many different mystics, there are so many different experiences they've all had, and yet they all seem to come together and revolve around this idea of, hey, we are all connected to each other, we are all connected to something greater than us, and that greater thing, whatever it is, it loves us, and it wants to see us do good by our fellow man. Across all mystics, across all of them, everything I've ever seen, it seems to center on that there is something more important than creature comforts, and there's something more important than, our image and our, reputation, what we spend our time with, our fun, and this and that, and up and down. There's something more than that, and that more doesn't even have so much to do with heaven as it does with dealing with our fellow man and making things around us better for everyone. But still, a lot of people decry mysticism, and in fact, I'm still working through this book right now, and I really hope to get a review on this soon, because this book is probably the most relevant one to us Christian witches specifically, and also one that just makes me feel bad for the writer, for reasons we'll get into when that video finally comes out at some point. But one of the things I notice about this writer is that she really decries mysticism and then describes herself having a very mystic prayer practice. And that's why I'm explaining what mysticism is. It's that direct relationship, that direct experience, that direct communication, that transcendence of, I believe there's something out there, to, I know there is because I've talked to it, I've felt it, I've seen it, I've witnessed it in my day-to-day living, in my dreams, in everything, right? So, and granted, of course, I fully accept that there's no objective proof. I fully accept that, you know, I can't prove God exists, and honestly, I don't care to prove he exists, because I don't need to know how it affects me and how I go about my life and how I go about my communities, my neighbors, and so on. That's a conversation for a separate video, which we'll get into next week. All that to say, the thing is, you really you can't exactly operate religion without a bit of that mysticism. I mean, sure, you can pray and go to church and blah, 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 but if you really are pursuing that relationship with God, that's where mysticism comes in. And in a more modern sense, that's where Christian witchcraft comes in, because frankly, what Christian witchcraft is just mysticism with arts and crafts. That's it. And with that said, this is where one thing in here really blew my mind and really just made the light bulb go off about why we see so many ex-witches turned Christian. Here's the thing. When I made this video about ex-witches turned Christian, there were of course a couple bad actors in there, right? Like there were a couple ones talking about being jumped out of witchcraft like it were a gang. Silly, ridiculous, dumb. But there were still people who genuinely believed that, oh my goodness, oh no, I'm being shown very viscerally that this is actually the devil and that the Christians were right and hellfire is real, right? Like there are people who fall into that trap. And it was John frickin' R. Marby who just made me understand exactly how and exactly why. And that is in The Dark Night of the Soul. So actually, The Dark Night of the Soul is first something I came across in this because it comes from St. John of the Cross, who was a Carmelite Spanish monk from about the 1500s or so. And he went through such a, what we would now call a tower moment, right? Where everything fell the hell apart and he felt so abandoned by God that he had what he then coined a dark night of the soul. And he pushed past it, and he kept believing anyway, and he kept trusting, and he kept moving towards God, and he somehow came out on the other side of it. That's kind of like how that works, right? Like that's like the Job moment, the story of the book of Job. That's that moment where all is lost, right? Where everything seems bad and everything seems empty. You start questioning whether God even exists in the first place, because how could things go so wrong? And then you just keep going and you keep holding on tight, and somehow, one way or another, you find a little light at the end of that very dark tunnel. You know what I'm saying? And so John Marby explains this like so. So on page 89, he has a little section called Following God into Darkness. Going through the dark night of the spirit is hard, but what is happening is really very simple. We have done what we can do to rid ourselves of our false images of God, even firing those old images, but now God must finish the job. And so what this means, to put that in context, Marby talks about two approaches to mysticism: apophatic, which means getting rid of all images and associations with God as we know him, and then cataphatic, which means using imagery, using metaphor and ideals to kind of try and understand him a little more. But the truth is that both apophatic and cataphatic understand that God is so infinite, so broad, so multifaceted, so incomprehensible, that any idea of who he is false. In fact, Marby even says that they are like idols, in that we're sitting here, right? If we have a picture of white Jesus, if I even have just this Jesus on this cross, this is still just one image of so many facets of what could be the divine. This is one rendition of it. This is not necessarily the whole of what Christ is, what God is, what any of it is. And so the dark night of the soul, as he's saying, is when you destroy all of your ideas about God, everything about who he is. You take him out of that box that dogma and the church have taught you to put him in, and you realize, oh shit, we really don't know much about God, do we? No. And so then he says, all of our images are illusions. So long as I am relating to God as an other, as someone who I can perceive as here or not here, I am tied up in an illusion of duality. As long as I can even conceive of God, then I am still worshipping a metaphor and idol no different from Baal. God needs to move us beyond images and idols, beyond subject and object, beyond dualities of darkness and light. So in order for that to happen, God winks out of existence. So far as the mystic is concerned. The image we held so dear, everything we thought we knew about God, disappears. Similarly, every vestigial illusion about ourselves is extinguished when we enter the darkness as well. This is necessary because no matter how hard we work at shedding false images, there are still vestiges remaining. The only answer for these remaining bits of Maya is surgery, and surgery is painful, even when it is the great physician doing the cutting. Progress is made by a process of subtraction, by taking things out. First, God surgically removes himself, which precipitates the dark night of the spirit. The only thing left is the mystic in his or her broken heart, covering his face in despair like Elijah. But these are all illusory things. The mystic, the broken heart, even our faces as we cover them. At this point, and this is the important part that tells me about ex-witches turned Christian, at this point, the mystic has a choice: to turn from the path, to give up, to abandon the covenant, to surrender to the hardness of the task and go back to a normal life of relative ease, or to follow God into the darkness. This is the ultimate act of trust. To turn from the world of being and form and follow God into nothing, to become nothing ourselves. And in this nothingness, the mystic finds themselves transformed. When you subtract everything that is not real from God, you end up with nothing. And when we subtract everything that is not real from ourselves, we end up once again with nothing. We experience the nothing that we are and the nothing that God is as the same nothing. We are transformed into God. So there's that pantheism in full effect. But in essence, right? So many times I hear Christians say things like, oh, you know, what fellowship does dark have with light? You know, demons are so different from God. God is this, God is that. You know, God is a man, God is a white man, God is all these things. You can't call the Holy Spirit she. God is a man, the Holy Spirit's a man, he's a he. All of these things are wrong. Every single one of these things are wrong. And the thing about ex-witches turned Christian is that when you commit yourself to any kind of mystic path, be it some kind of witchcraft or some kind of spiritualism or some kind of new age, whatever, you will have that tower moment, that dark night of the soul, where everything falls apart, just flattens itself, and you are left with such nothingness that you become frightened. And in fact, you might even get confronted with things that you were convinced could never be God. Because in order to accept that these images are still illusions, you have to confront them. And people have all these images and visions of demons and hellfire and all these things, but they don't realize that these things are God as much as they are not God. All of these things are connected together, right? In the words of Daniel C. Matt of the Essential Kabbalah, the demonic is rooted in the divine, because the demonic is the first step. Remember how the first step, as Marby said, is subtraction? The first step of the demonic, you know, or the divine, the first step of the divine is subtraction, is separation. And that happens in the justification, the reconciliation that comes after that separation. That is where the divine steps in. But the demonic has to happen first. That separation has to happen first. And people don't understand this. So these ex-witches turned Christian, they experience these scary things. They realize that they're dealing with stuff that they've been told repeatedly all their life is actually very bad and very harmful, very scary, very dangerous. And they run back to safety. They run back to the white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus and back to the neatly defined boxes and parameters of their dogma and their church and their structure and their Bible and everything else. And they completely abandon the quest of actually figuring out what God really is and what he is not. Figuring out who he is and who you are. And that's where this book just cracked open a whole new layer for me. And now all I can see when people come into my comments and say, well, you're being deceived by demons, this and that, all I can see is people who failed the Dark Knight. All I can see is people who failed that test. And it's sad. It really is to me. But at the same time, not everyone will be able to hack the kind of things that mysticism entails. And that's fine, honestly. As I said before in that video, it's okay if witchcraft, mysticism, whatever is not for you. It's fine. Everyone will have some of it. I do think that some of it is for everyone. I just think that not everyone is ready or will ever be ready to fully dive in to the deep end of it. You know what I mean? They might dip their toes in, they might get a little spiritual, but it takes a lot to be able to fully commit to that, and that's okay. What's not okay is for people to come in and start trying to pull other people off of their path. It's just like when I was growing up and my mom would try to tell me, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that because it's bad, blah, 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 and I still have to go do it anyway and find out for myself. If you're a parent watching, you know how that goes, right? So it's the same idea. People have to find out for themselves. They have to be able to take the test for themselves. You can't pull them off that path. And so this is where I get frustrated with people who keep trying to insist that because they failed, that everyone else should fail too, even if they don't realize that that's what they're saying. But overall, this book is a fantastic resource if you want to get into mysticism. It also goes over these stages, right, of a mystic's path, which is awakening, when you get little glimpses of truth and you start realizing, oh, wait, things are not what they seem. And then there's that purgation. Purgation is really important. That's when you are stripping away all the illusions, taking away everything that doesn't serve you, and that's hard. That's very hard. That's where you're going to find that dark night of the soul. But then after that is illumination, in which you really begin to experience the divine, and then after that is union, and that's when you are completely working, as Marby puts it, as God's own hands and feet. Like, your sense of ego and identity, you're not doing things for your ego and identity anymore. You're not doing things to satisfy your own pride or your own satisfy or anything that you want. You are doing it specifically because you know it should be done. Because you know that you have that responsibility to be God's hands and feet, to act on his behalf, to make the world better through these things. And union is very difficult. Not a lot of people ever really get there because it's a process. It's a continuous process. That's what I'm saying. Some people never even get past purgation. However, it's really funny in here, John says exactly what my friend Father Kyle said, which is, well, you either do the purgation now while you're alive, strip down everything that isn't truly you, or you do it when you die and you go to purgatory and basically take that spiritual acid bath and melt everything off you anyway. The more you do in this life, the less you gotta sit in the acid bath later. But no, absolutely fantastic book. John R. Marby himself is a theologian, is a preacher, and wrote this book actually for his college courses on mysticism, because the original text was 400 pages of seriously dense stuff, kind of like this, from what I understand. And so this really boils it down, makes it so simple, easy to understand, and it really speaks to what is honestly the heart of Christian mysticism, of Christian witchcraft. I definitely think that it's a great book for anyone who's interested in it, and that no one should be scared away from mysticism, because by engaging in it, you will only learn. You will only learn. Whether it's about yourself, about God, or anything in between, you will learn. So, I'll see you guys next time to talk more about Christian witch topics, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. See ya!